Bone Lake, a rather obscure film about a couple on vacation at a secluded estate that is upended when they're forced to share the mansion they're staying in with a mysterious couple, which leads to a nightmarish entanglement of sex, lies, and manipulation, culminating in a frenetic battle for their very survival, made its way to theaters this weekend, and I have to admit I'm still very much on the fence about this film. Now, I thought the premise of the film was fine, though I think it gave birth to a rather predictable story once the setup was complete. And speaking of the setup, I actually think Josh Friedlander did a pretty decent job with the character construction of both Diego and Sage, which was a fairly big part of setting up the film's second and third acts. The small writing was serviceable here, and that's important to note, seeing as how we get most of the character development through dialogue because almost the entire film takes place in a single location over the course of a day or two. And speaking of the location, I do think Mercedes Bryce Morgan managed to use said location well in the telling of this story, something that certainly goes in the plus column here. I thought the casting was just okay, and so was the acting, but I get the sense that this was a low-budget indie film that just so happened to get a theatrical distribution deal, so there likely wasn't enough money to get heavier hitters in this one, and I think that would have made this film both more immersive and ultimately more marketable, especially given its other limitations. And speaking of limitations, where this film really disappoints is its lack of thoughtfulness as it pertains to how it makes use of nudity in the telling of this story. This film has an R rating, but I would argue that's not enough for this sex-fueled thriller, as there is a lot more nudity than was ever necessary given the logistics of the narrative choices that were made throughout. Seriously, this film is a step or two away from being something you might find on Showtime at 2 o'clock in the morning. But despite the overly erotic nature of the story, the twist was interesting in that it was part predictable but also part surprise before ultimately ending exactly the way you would expect. Now, overall, I'd give this movie a 65%, or a 6.5 out of 10 if you're thinking IMDb score, essentially a D+ for a letter grade. Look, this film does some things fairly well, but not enough to compensate for the things it does horribly badly. And when you couple that with what looked like a fairly low budget, not a bankable actor in sight, the almost reckless approach to nudity, and the predictable ending, this film just doesn't have enough to justify what looks to be a wide theatrical release. Instead, it feels like a film that could have been an adult film company's attempt at a mainstream project.